I'd like to talk about the brief history of the 4th of July and just some fun facts. So, in order to know really the history of the 4th of July, we have to talk about the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is where we were set apart from England back in 1776 and where we declared our independence from them. A really famous saying that I think everyone has heard is comes from the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, which states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence states that the principles on which we live on and our government is based on not just legally binding, but are powerful and continue to inspire people around the world to fight for freedom and equality. The Declaration of Independence was really just that one stepping stone towards an independent nation from England. And in order to know kind of why we had to make the preamble, we have to know kind of before when America was still a part of England. And let's just talk about it. So, back in the early 1770s, more colonists became convinced that basically the British government, was trying to take away their freedom and like taxation, control, and when they were beginning to prepare for war in the 1775, the first fight broke out in April, Massachusetts, when the king declared that the colonists in state of open and avowed rebellion. So this is King George. This is the famous King George, and he was the man in charge of England during the time of the breakaway from America and Britain. But King George III basically stated that these Americans are trying to fight back, and they get them to, like, he was trying to bully them to stay with Britain. And after a while, America just had enough. So they chose independence and they elected delegates to attend a Congress to introduce a resolution that these united colonies are an all right to be free and independent states. They appointed a committee of 5 to write an announcement explaining the reasons for independence. Thomas Jefferson, who chaired the committee and had established himself as a bold and talented writer, wrote the first draft. So on June 11th, Jefferson, he borrowed freely from existing documents like the Virginia Declaration to get his Declaration of Independence written, and in less than 3 weeks after he'd begun, presented his draft to Congress. So, Congress voted to declare the independence. 2 days later, it ratified the text of the Declaration. John Dunlap, an official printer to the Congress, worked through the night to set the Declaration in type and print approximately 200 copies. These copies are known as the Dunlap broadsides and were sent to various people in like the government hierarchy and to different troops. And one copy crossed the Atlantic and reached King George III months later. And the British response scolded the misguided Americans in their, I guess, extravagant and admissible claim of independence. So they thought they left Britain was because they didn't want to be ruled by Britain. Because I bet they loved I bet they loved their family there. I bet they had a life there. They built something for themselves. But just the authority and rule that the British government had over them kind of made them want to leave. So it makes sense why these Americans were like, hey, I don't know why we are basically living in the British rule. Otherwise, I would have just stayed in America. So, going back to what I said about July 2nd, when they ratified it, and 2 days later, the Declaration signed. It wasn't until I would say, August 4th when a lot of people actually signed it. So the reason why we celebrate it on July 4th is actually kind of interesting. So America is about to celebrate its 250th birthday next year. So this is 249. America is 249. And see here. By the early summer, they reached a conclusion that England had to go. Richard Henry Lee of Virginia proposed a resolution in June declaring us an independent nation. It was passed by an unanimous vote on July 2nd. So many of our founding fathers thought that would be the day that we celebrated the beginnings of America. John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail on July 3rd. The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable day in history for America. He believes that it will be celebrated through the generations. And although Adams was penning those words, Thomas Jefferson was busy scratching out an actual formal Declaration of Independence, not just a saying of "we declare freedom from British rule," but actually wrote it down on paper for people to sign. So the task was assigned to Thomas Jefferson and a committee of 5 other people, but Thomas Jefferson was really the person who contributed a lot to it. And in less than 48 hours, he crafted a document that would be known to many as the Declaration of Independence. So on July 4th, delegates approved the final version, which is why the date appears on the famous parchment paper now preserved in the National Archives as July 4th. But on July 15th, New York delegates received permission from state authorities to support the declaration. And on July 19th, certain states thought certain things. It says many modern researchers now conclude that the declaration was formally signed on August 2nd, which actually made it official. So July 4th was when the Declaration of Independence was finally drafted and went out to multiple states, including New York. But it wasn't until August 2nd when everybody put their signature on it, declaring that this was the official document for independence from Britain. So it seems that nobody actually put their name on it until July 4th, when Sir Thomas Paine wrote in 1796. No person signed it on that day, nor for many days after. So why is July 4th celebrated as America's birthday? So even though most delegates didn't sign the Declaration of Independence until August 2nd, 1776, July 4th is still considered the U.S.'s birthday. So on July 2nd, Congress voted to approve it. July 4th, they adopted it as a Declaration of Independence, written by Jefferson and revised by a committee of 5. Then it was printed and distributed with the date July 4th, 1776. But the signing didn't actually happen until August 2nd, 1776. Few even signed it after August 2nd. So the date July 4th was already printed on the copies that circulated. So that's the date that just stuck. So fun fact, John Adams, the one who said that he wrote to his wife Abigail that July 2nd would be commemorated as the U.S.'s birthday, he was wrong about that, and he even skipped the July 4th celebrations and protests for years because he thought that July 2nd was the actual day. So in short, July 4th is the day that the U.S. declared what it was, but August 2nd wasn't until August 2nd was the day they actually made it official, the signatures. So, adopted July 4th, 13 American colonies were independent from Great Britain. So what it looks like, the photos. Yes, the Declaration of Independence still remains relevant today. People still celebrate it. That's why we still celebrate July 4th, because it still applies to us that we're free. And here are some fun facts. So, did you know 10 facts about the Declaration of Independence? Here it is. Number 1, it was not actually signed on July 4th, 1776. We knew that. It was signed on August 2nd, nearly a month later. The only names that appear on the first copy of those are John Hancock, Congress President, and Secretary Charles Thompson. The library's copy was likely stolen from George Washington. The Pennsylvania Evening Post featured the Declaration in its July 6 edition, the first printed after the Dunlap broadside. Thomas Jefferson was 33 years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but was already well known, and he received help from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin to draft the document he called an expression of the American mind. The New York delegation at first abstained from adopting the Declaration at the July 4th meeting. Ralph Tremblay's lithograph of the Founding Fathers signed the Declaration depicts a fictional event. Signers knew that signing this might cost them their lives. The British did target the Founding Fathers, destroying and looting many of their homes. It was a story that John Hart of New Jersey, when he came out of hiding, returned home, never found all of his children. The Marquis de Lafayette hung an official engraving of the U.S. Declaration of Independence in his bedroom suite. And last but not least, the Albert Small collection is the most comprehensive collection of letters, documents, and early printings related to the Declaration and its signers. So, did you know that Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence? So, here are some 4th of July traditions back then versus today. Back then, there were public readings of the Declaration. People would gather in town squares and read the Declaration of Independence and remember what freedom meant to them. Bell ringing and bonfires. Towns rang church bells and lit bonfires. Gun salutes and cannons. Soldiers fired cannons and muskets in celebration. Patriotic toasts and speeches. Leaders and locals gave speeches, toasts to liberty, and read essays praising the new country. Church services and serious reflection. People gave thanks for freedom in church services. And then the 4th of July today, in modern times. Bunch of fireworks shows. Barbecues and cookouts. Parades and parties. Beach days and lake trips. Concerts, festivals, and baseball. But the same thing that remains today versus back then is that whether it was speeches or sparklers in 2025, the spirit and what the Declaration of Independence still means to us still stands today. And that's why I wish you guys happy 4th of July. So that's why I wish you guys a happy 4th of July. So that concludes my first video on the elephant. If you like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully be back with a new video next week.